March 1942. A merchant sailor hangs onto debris in the frigid North Atlantic, his eyes fixed on his ship, packed with Canadian wheat, as it disappears into dark waters. He counts himself fortunate. Most of his shipmates perished with the vessel, casualties of a torpedo strike that gave no warning. Below the surface, a German U-boat captain already calculates coordinates for his next victim. This nightmare scenario played out with terrible consistency throughout 1942, a year that almost destroyed Britain. The statistics paint a picture of disaster. During just the first 6 months of 1942, U-boats destroyed over 3 million tons of Allied shipping. That equals approximately 585 merchant vessels. More than 3 ships lost every 24 hours. Admiral Karl Dönitz's U-boat force operated with virtually no opposition, particularly during what Germans cheerfully termed the Second Happy Time. American coastal waters, newly involved in combat and desperately unprepared, turned into a killing zone. Operation Paukenschlag, Drumbeat, witnessed U-boats sinking tankers visible to people walking on Florida's beaches. Yet the primary battlefield remained the North Atlantic shipping lanes. Britain, surrounded by ocean, brought in nearly 60 million tons of supplies each year before hostilities began. Everything from fuel oil to dried eggs, from steel to sugar, had to traverse 3,000 miles of progressively dangerous waters. By summer 1942, imports had plummeted to merely 23 million tons. The equation was mercilessly straightforward. Britain used more than it created. Each sunken cargo ship didn't merely mean lost goods. It meant lost time, lost rations, lost energy, lost morale. Winston Churchill, typically optimistic even during Britain's bleakest hours, later admitted that only one threat genuinely terrified him throughout the entire conflict: the U-boat danger. His fear was justified. The Germans had transformed submarine combat into an exact science. Type 7 Maui U-boats, the backbone of Dönitz's armada, functioned in coordinated wolf packs, Rudeltaktik in German. These weren't lone predators, but organized groups of 8, 10, sometimes 15 submarines operating together. They'd spread out along established convoy pathways, and when one vessel spotted targets, it transmitted positions to the others. Then they'd close in, striking in successive waves, typically after darkness fell. When running on the surface, U-boats could outpace the slow-moving cargo vessels. The escort situation was desperate. Royal Navy destroyers and corvettes, impossibly overextended across worldwide responsibilities, fought to defend convoys that could span 10 miles of ocean. The Mid-Atlantic Gap, that lethal expanse beyond shore-based aircraft range, earned the name the Black Pit. Here, 600 miles from any runway, U-boats struck with virtual certainty of hitting their marks. Escort commanders faced a deadly challenge they couldn't solve. Convoy ON 192 in May 1942 lost 7 vessels out of 41. SC 107 in November lost 15 out of 42. The existing defensive approach wasn't functioning. Convoys traveled in columns, escorts circled them in predictable formations, and U-boats simply waited for favorable positioning. Depth charges, the main anti-submarine armament, demanded a ship pass almost straight above a submerged U-boat, finding a needle in a haystack across the enormous Atlantic. ASDIC, Britain's precursor to sonar, had serious drawbacks. It couldn't find surfaced submarines, lost tracking at close distances, and became useless in heavy weather. Morale aboard cargo ships collapsed. Crews volunteered knowing they faced roughly 1 in 4 odds of being torpedoed. Many ships completed multiple voyages, witnessing sister vessels disappear in explosions of water and fire. The mental burden was crushing. Britain required a solution, urgently. The island nation was literally dying for an answer. Into this emergency stepped a man the Admiralty had consistently ignored. Commander Frederick John Walker wasn't the Royal Navy's vision of an exemplary officer. At 43 years old in 1941, he'd spent considerable time in administrative roles rather than commanding ships, a career trajectory that usually identified an officer as capable but unremarkable. He'd been denied advancement repeatedly. His service record mentioned a habit of unconventional tactical reasoning that disturbed senior leadership. However, Walker possessed something the Royal Navy desperately required: an obsessive, analytical mind that identified patterns where others saw randomness. Walker had entered the Royal Navy in 1909, age 11, as a cadet at Osborne Naval College. His initial career showed potential. He'd served on HMS Ajax during the First World War, and later focused on anti-submarine operations during the 1920s, an era when most ambitious officers viewed submarine hunting as an insignificant assignment. While others ascended the career ladder through battleship postings and diplomatic roles, Walker immersed himself in the mechanics of underwater combat. He covered notebooks with computations about torpedo dispersions, submarine submersion rates, and depth charge arcs. His fellow officers considered him odd. They would turn out to be dramatically mistaken. By 1941, Walker's unconventional standing had earned him command of HMS Stork, a Bittern-class sloop, hardly a prestigious posting. Sloops were smaller, slower protection vessels, unglamorous workhorses of convoy security. But Walker approached his assignment like a maritime research station. He trained his crew without mercy, measuring and remeasuring every procedure. How rapidly could they ready depth charges? How quickly could they react to an ASDIC reading? He recorded responses to the second, then insisted they trim additional seconds. His officers initially considered him insane. One sailor later remembered, "The captain drilled us on dropping practice charges until we could perform it unconsciously. He'd rouse us at random hours, sound battle stations, clock us with his stopwatch. We believed he'd lost his mind, but there was logic behind Walker's seeming madness. He'd recognized something other escort leaders overlooked. Anti-submarine combat was essentially a mathematics challenge disguised as naval warfare. Every encounter reduced to geometry, velocity, likelihood. A U-boat diving to escape had restricted oxygen, approximately 12 hours submerged at reduced speed. Its battery capacity limited its underwater velocity and movement. Its periscope offered restricted vision. Its torpedoes moved at predictable speeds along known paths. These weren't mythical ocean beasts. They were mechanisms bound by physics. Walker's methodology bordered on fanatical. He slept 4 hours nightly, dedicating his watch hours to calculations, modeling situations. What if a convoy changed direction every 7 minutes rather than holding steady? What if escorts steamed not around the convoy but between its columns? What if depth charge sequences were varied, his quarters filled with charts marked with geometric sketches, vectors, trajectories, probability zones? The Admiralty's tactical approach for convoy protection had scarcely changed since 1917. Shield the merchants, maintain fixed patterns, respond to strikes. Walker considered this reactive strategy fundamentally broken. U-boats controlled the tempo. They selected when and where to engage. They leveraged predictability. Walker's breakthrough was theoretical. What if escorts didn't shield convoys? What if they pursued submarines? What if the predators became the prey? In December 1941, Walker assumed command of the 36th Escort Group, multiple ships under his tactical authority. Finally, he possessed the platform to transform his concepts into reality. His first breakthrough appeared straightforward, but proved transformative. relentless pursuit of every suspected contact. Where other commanders would release a few depth charges, then resume convoy station, Walker's teams would track a submarine ruthlessly, occasionally for 18 hours, until they destroyed it or drained its batteries, compelling it to surface. Walker's offensive hunting methods brought victories, but he'd identified a fundamental problem that haunted him. The kills he secured came after torpedoes had already connected. He was addressing consequences, not root causes. The actual problem tormented him. Why were U-boats striking targets with such lethal precision? The explanation resided in mathematics that overwhelmingly advantaged the attacker. Convoy procedures demanded merchant ships travel in straight paths at steady speeds. This wasn't random. It was operational necessity. 40 or 50 cargo vessels, many operated by civilian crews with different skill levels, needed to hold formation across hundreds of miles of ocean. Maintaining position in a convoy required predictability. Ships steamed in columns approximately 600 yards separated, keeping exact positions relative to the lead vessel. Any variation risked collision, especially at night when radio silence was enforced and visual signals restricted. The Admiralty's convoy guidelines were unambiguous: maintain direction and velocity, execute course changes simultaneously only when commanded. But this predictability converted every cargo ship into a mathematical guarantee for German torpedo computers. The U-boat's principal targeting device, the Vorhaltrechner, a deflection calculator, was a mechanical computer of remarkable complexity. A U-boat captain needed to enter just 3 values: target velocity, target direction, and torpedo velocity. The calculator then generated the necessary lead angle, where to aim, not at the target's present location, but where it would arrive when the torpedo struck. For a target holding constant direction and speed, this calculation achieved near certainty. Consider the mechanics. A G7E electric torpedo traveled at 30 knots. A typical convoy moved at 8 knots. If a U-boat launched from 1,000 yards, a standard engagement distance, the torpedo needed approximately 60 seconds to arrive. During those 60 seconds, a merchant ship traveling at 8 knots advanced roughly 270 yards. The Vorhaltrechner determined this deflection angle immediately. Against a target maintaining steady heading, a skilled U-boat captain could reach hit rates exceeding 60%. Walker examined engagement records and discovered exactly that. When U-boats secured favorable firing angles, they seldom failed. The challenge intensified with torpedo spreads. U-boats generally fired in volleys, 3 or 4 torpedoes with minor angular spacing between them. This produced a fan of torpedoes blanketing an ocean area. Even if one torpedo passed ahead, another might strike the target amidships, and a third might connect astern. The mathematics became a probability field, and straight-line targets sat directly within that field. Walker calculated obsessively. He determined that a U-boat positioned 90 degrees off a convoy's beam directly to the side had a 58-second interval from periscope depth to firing solution. The merchant ship's steady bearing and velocity meant the Vorhaltrechner's calculation stayed accurate for that complete interval. The U-boat commander could proceed deliberately, verify his information, and launch with assurance. It was, Walker understood, like firing at targets on tracks. German operational manuals validated this edge. Seized documents revealed U-boat commanders were instructed to pursue track angles between 70 and 110 degrees, nearly sideways approaches where target movement was most foreseeable. They avoided tail chases or frontal approaches, where even minor speed miscalculations disrupted computations. The doctrine exploited geometry mercilessly. Walker suggested radical alternatives at escort commanders' meetings. What if convoys zigzagged, continuous direction changes that nullified torpedo calculations? He encountered institutional opposition bordering on animosity. Senior officers, highlighted practical impossibilities. Merchant ships couldn't perform intricate maneuvers. Collisions would happen. Formation keeping would fail. Convoys would disperse. One admiral rejected Walker's proposals as academically fascinating, but operationally unworkable. But Walker continued, examining every element. A merchant ship turning even 20 degrees modified the deflection computation substantially. If that turn happened randomly during the U-boat's 58-second firing interval, the torpedo calculator's answer became worthless. The torpedo would pass harmlessly forward or aft. The U-boat would need to recalculate, raise its periscope for fresh readings, risk discovery. The revelation arrived during a particularly savage crossing in February 1943. Walker's escort group was protecting Convoy HX 224 when 3 ships were torpedoed within 30 minutes. Walker stood on Stork's Bridge, observing oil flames light up the night, and something clicked in his consciousness. He'd been tackling the challenge incorrectly. Zigzagging didn't need to be chaotic. It needed to be methodical, yet unforeseeable to the adversary. That nuanced difference altered everything. Walker withdrew to his cabin and didn't appear for 16 hours. His executive officer later recounted discovering him encircled by charts, compass, protractor, and innumerable sheets filled with geometric sketches. Walker had effectively reverse-engineered the U-boat's targeting solution. If he understood the limitations of the Vorhalt-Rechner, he could create a maneuver sequence that systematically invalidated its computations. The sequence needed particular qualities: direction changes frequent enough to disrupt torpedo solutions, yet not so radical that merchant ships broke formation. Modifications timed to statistical probability rather than fixed schedules. And, critically, a design that seemed random to outside observation, but followed an internal structure convoy commodores could implement. What materialized was Pattern Buttercup, Walker's whimsical designation for a deadly defensive geometry. The pattern specified direction changes of 25 to 40 degrees at intervals ranging between 4 and 12 minutes. The exact timing and degree of turn adhered to a predetermined order that Walker encoded on a simple reference card. A convoy commodore would begin the pattern upon departing port, executing the card's directions precisely. To a U-boat commander watching through his periscope, the convoy seemed to wander erratically across the ocean, direction and timing unpredictable. But within the convoy, every ship performed identical turns concurrently, preserving formation. The brilliance resided in Walker's probability mathematics. German procedure required U-boats to monitor a convoy for at least 15 minutes before attacking, collecting data for the Vorhalt-Rechner. Buttercup guaranteed that during any 15-minute observation period, a convoy would perform at least 2 direction changes of unknown degree. This contaminated the targeting information. The U-boat commander might record speed and bearing, but by the time his torpedoes arrived at their projected intercept location, the entire convoy had shifted to a different course. The torpedoes would traverse empty water. Walker's computations revealed something even more sophisticated. The pattern's direction changes, when averaged over an hour, preserved the convoy's base heading toward its objective. Ships didn't drift aimlessly. They zigzagged around a mean course line. Navigation stayed feasible. A convoy departing Halifax for Liverpool still reached Liverpool, having merely followed a somewhat longer, winding route. Walker projected Buttercup added roughly 8% to travel duration, a negligible price if it decreased torpedo strikes. The Admiralty's reaction was immediate and discouraging. A staff document from March 1943 termed Buttercup excessively complicated and prone to generate confusion and accidents. Walker's direct superior advised against deployment. The objections raised were foreseeable. Merchant captains lacked preparation for such operations. Nighttime turns endangered ships losing visual connection. Radio silence couldn't be preserved if confusion developed, and, fundamentally, it challenged decades of convoy tradition. Walker confronted a bureaucratic barrier, but discovered an unexpected champion in Admiral Sir Max Horton, freshly appointed Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches Command. Horton, himself recognized for unconventional reasoning during his submarine service in the First World War, examined Walker's mathematics and recognized value. In April 1943, Horton sanctioned restricted testing. Walker could deploy Buttercup with convoys under his immediate escort, assuming merchant captains volunteered and acknowledged the hazards. It was a reluctant authorization filled with conditions, but Walker embraced it. He invested the following 2 weeks instructing convoy commodores, typically retired Royal Navy admirals recalled to duty for convoy supervision. Walker's presentation was mathematical rather than persuasive. He displayed the geometry, the probability mathematics, the torpedo mechanics. Some commodores dismissed him as eccentric. Others, especially those who'd observed too many ships perish, were prepared to attempt anything. The mathematics supporting Buttercup demonstrated why it functioned so devastatingly effectively against German torpedo strategy. Walker had essentially weaponized geometry and probability theory, converting the U-boat's principal asset, the Vorhaltrechner's accuracy, into a fatal weakness. To comprehend the pattern's success, one must first grasp what a U-boat commander faced during an engagement. A submerged U-boat approached its quarry at periscope depth, approximately 15 meters beneath the waves. The commander's perspective through the periscope was constrained, perhaps 6 kilometers in favorable conditions, considerably less in Atlantic conditions. He required 3 vital measurements: target bearing, which direction, target velocity, how rapid, and target angle, which orientation it maintained relative to the U-boat. German instruction manuals prescribed obtaining at least 3 periscope readings over 12 to 15 minutes to confirm precise information. Each periscope exposure threatened detection, so commanders reduced observation duration. Here's where Buttercup's timing became lethal. Walker engineered the pattern so changes happened on average every 7 minutes, exactly half the minimum observation duration German procedure demanded. Consider the mechanics. A U-boat commander raises his periscope at minute 0, records a bearing, observes the convoy heading 045 degrees at 8 knots. He submerges to prevent detection. At minute 6, he surfaces again for a second reading. Buttercup has performed a 30-degree turn at minute 4. The convoy now heads 075 degrees. The commander, unaware a turn transpired, presumes the bearing shift resulted from his own U-boat's positioning. He enters corrupted information into the Vorhaltrechner. The torpedo mechanics amplified this mistake. G7E electric torpedoes ran at fixed depth, usually configured to 4 meters to impact below a ship's waterline. They traveled straight, incapable of adjusting direction mid-journey. Once launched, a torpedo was dedicated to intercepting a particular point in the ocean determined at firing. If the target altered direction even 15 degrees after firing, a torpedo aimed at center mass would fail entirely. Walker's pattern ensured convoys altered direction approximately every 7 minutes. A torpedo's travel time from 1,000 yards was roughly 60 seconds. The mathematics were brutal to the attacker. A U-boat had to fire, have its torpedoes arrive at the target, and witness them explode, all within a 7-minute window before the subsequent direction. Change rendered everything irrelevant. Walker incorporated probability science into Buttercup's architecture. The pattern wasn't genuinely random, that would be navigationally unworkable, but it was pseudo-random from an external watcher's viewpoint. The direction change intervals fluctuated between 4 and 12 minutes, following a predetermined yet intricate sequence. The degree of turn varied between 25 and 40 degrees, again following a sequence. To a U-boat commander, this seemed chaotic. He couldn't recognize the pattern from brief periscope observations. He couldn't anticipate when the following turn would happen, or its magnitude. The deflection calculations told the story mathematically. For a beam engagement, 90 degrees to target heading at 1,000 yards, the Vorhaltrechner determined a deflection angle of approximately 15 degrees. This meant targeting 15 degrees ahead of the target's current location. But if the target turned 30 degrees during the torpedo's 60-second travel, the deflection error reached 45 degrees. At 1,000 yards, that's a miss distance of roughly 800 yards, far exceeding a torpedo's lethal radius. The target would be completely unaware it had even been engaged. Walker's notebooks held page after page of these computations, developed for different situations, various attack angles, various distances, various torpedo speeds. He'd essentially charted the complete probability landscape of U-boat engagements and engineered Buttercup to occupy the zones of maximum defensive benefit. One computation demonstrated that against a zigzagging target performing Buttercup, a U-boat's actual hit likelihood declined from approximately 60% to below 25%, and that presumed the U-boat even secured a firing angle before the convoy's escort located it. The initial operational trial occurred with Convoy ONS-5 in late April 1943, though Walker wouldn't accompany that specific convoy personally. Instead, his validation opportunity came on May 3rd, 1943, when he assumed leadership of the escort group for Convoy HX-237, westbound from Liverpool. Walker assembled the merchant captains before sailing and introduced Buttercup not as a directive, but as a trial. 27 ships agreed, 14 captains refused, choosing traditional straight-line steaming. Walker accepted this split, intrigued to see if outcomes would prove more convincing than orders. The Atlantic Passage began routinely. Walker initiated Buttercup at dusk on day 2, signaling the pattern's commencement with a lamp signal to the convoy commodore aboard the merchant ship Fort Cumberland. The first direction change, 32 degrees to starboard, occurred at the 7-minute point. Walker observed through binoculars as the Buttercup participants performed the turn with acceptable accuracy. 2 ships swung wide, 1 turned slowly, but the formation maintained. The 14 non-participants held base heading, forming 2 separate groups within the larger convoy. German naval intelligence had detected HX-237's departure through their B-Dienst code-breaking operation, and U-boat Group Elbe, 9 submarines, established a patrol line across its anticipated route. On May 6th, U-258 established contact approximately 800 miles west of Ireland, deep in the mid-Atlantic gap where aircraft coverage couldn't extend. Kapitänleutnant Wilhelm von Massenhausen shadowed the convoy through the afternoon, transmitting location updates while remaining beyond escort distance. By nightfall, 5 U-boats had assembled for a synchronized strike. What transpired next bewildered the German commanders. U-258 approached from the convoy's port quarter, securing what should have been a perfect firing angle. Von Massenhausen later documented in his war diary, captured after the U-boat's eventual destruction in 1944, that the convoy's conduct was erratic and unforeseen. He monitored for 18 minutes attempting to confirm firing information, but the target ships kept changing direction. He launched a 4-torpedo spread at what his calculator determined as a guaranteed hit. All 4 torpedoes failed. The war diary entry stated, "Convoy performing irregular maneuvers of unknown intention, deflection computations unreliable." U-414, attacking from starboard, faced similar frustration. Kapitänleutnant von Bülow fired 3 torpedoes at a substantial freighter he'd classified as approximately 8,000 tons. 1 torpedo connected, but it struck a ship in the non-Buttercup group, the American Liberty ship Samuel Huntington, which had maintained straight heading. The vessel, transporting iron ore, sank in 4 minutes. Von Bülow attempted to continue the assault, but Walker's escorts, having identified his location from the torpedo tracks, drove him deep with an aggressive depth charge sequence. Throughout the night of May 6th to 7th, the Wolfpack made continuous attempts. U-954 achieved a stern shot at a straggler, but missed when the target performed a Buttercup turn precisely as the torpedoes arrived at firing distance. U-638 reported, "Impossible to confirm reliable targeting information. Convoy direction changes every few minutes." In sum, the U-boats launched 23 torpedoes at HX 237. Only 3 found marks, all 3 hitting ships in the non-Buttercup group, maintaining predictable headings. Walker's own vessels went offensive. HMS Starling, with Walker aboard, obtained ASDIC contact on U-954 at 0340 hours. The pursuit lasted 7 hours. Walker pioneered a method he termed creeping attack. One escort maintained ASDIC contact, while another approached slowly, silently, to release depth charges with devastating precision. U-954's hull collapsed at depth. All hands perished. By May 8th, the Wolfpack had withdrawn, fuel and torpedoes depleted, having destroyed 3 ships from the non-Buttercup group and 0 from the zigzagging vessels. Walker's preliminary evaluation, written in his after-action assessment, was typically modest. Pattern Buttercup appears to diminish successful torpedo strikes substantially. The evidence mounted quickly through May and June 1943. Walker's second support group accompanied 7 convoys during this span, with Buttercup employed on 5 of them. The statistics were compelling enough that the Admiralty's Operational Research Division, a relatively recent organization applying scientific analysis to naval operations, took interest. They sent analysts to Liverpool to review Walker's information alongside comparative data from conventionally routed convoys. The figures crystallized into an unmistakable pattern. Convoys utilizing Buttercup Zigzag between May and August 1943 experienced an average loss rate of 2.1%, roughly 1 ship per 50. Similar convoys on comparable routes using straight-line or basic evasive routing endured 5.4% losses. The decrease wasn't quite the 60% Walker's preliminary projection, but it was 61% when comparing identical route sections during identical time frames. The Operational Research Division's assessment, submitted in September 1943, determined Commander Walker's systematic zigzag pattern diminishes successful torpedo strikes by approximately 3/5 compared to traditional convoy routing. More striking was the secondary consequence Walker had anticipated, but the Admiralty initially discounted. Zigzagging convoys actually drew more persistent U-boat engagement, which generated destruction opportunities for escorts. U-boat commanders, exasperated by repeated failures, remained in contact longer, made additional periscope observations, assumed riskier angles. This revealed them. Walker's second support group destroyed 6 U-boats between May and August 1943, an exceptional rate when the entire Royal Navy averaged approximately 8 U-boat kills monthly across all operations. The decisive moment arrived with Convoy ON 202 in October 1943. Walker escorted 41 merchant ships through conditions so extreme that 3 vessels sustained structural harm. U-boat Group Schlieffen, 14 submarines, intercepted them south of Greenland. The resulting 5-day engagement saw Walker's group employing Buttercup continuously, while simultaneously pursuing attackers. The U-boats launched an estimated 57 torpedoes, 4 discovered targets. Walker's escorts destroyed 3 U-boats, U-282, U-842, and U-610. The kill-to-loss ratio, 3 U-boats eliminated for 4 merchants damaged, inverted the Atlantic's grim arithmetic. Admiral Horton personally examined ON 202's outcomes. On November 3, 1943, he released an Admiralty Fleet order requiring Buttercup's implementation across Western Approaches Command. The directive was bureaucratically mundane. Zigzag pattern Buttercup is hereby approved for convoy defense operations, but its consequences were revolutionary. Decades of convoy tradition overturned by one commander's obsessive computations. Walker received advancement to captain and authority over additional support groups. But the acknowledgement he treasured most originated from an unexpected source. Decoded German naval transmissions, which Walker never realized Britain could intercept, revealed U-boat commanders expressing mounting frustration. One communication from November 1943, transmitted by the commander of U-boat Group Titz, protested, "Allied convoys now performing continuous evasive operations, making deflection computations impossible. Achievement rate has declined dramatically. Request authorization to abandon patrol zone." Donitz's reply was terse. Maintain location, continue strikes. But the mathematics had shifted against him. By December 1943, the wider Battle of the Atlantic had turned conclusively. Multiple elements contributed: expanded air coverage, enhanced radar, additional escorts, ultra-intelligence, acoustic torpedoes. But convoy zigzagging fulfilled a quantifiable function. The Operational Research Division's concluding assessment, released in January 1944, measured Buttercup's impact. It projected the pattern had preserved approximately 90 to 120 merchant ships between May and December 1943. That represented roughly 600,000 tons of shipping, transporting food, fuel, ordnance, and supplies that arrived in Britain rather than settling on the ocean bottom. Walker himself continued at sea, pushing himself and his crews mercilessly. By early 1944, his individual count reached 15 U-boats, destroyed or shared destructions, establishing him as the Royal Navy's most accomplished anti-submarine commander. He'd confirmed his obsessive computations with outcomes that spoke more powerfully than Admiralty skepticism ever could. Walker never observed the complete extent of his influence. On July 9, 1944, aged 48, he collapsed on the bridge of HMS Starling while returning to Liverpool. The ship's physician diagnosed total physical collapse. Walker had driven himself without compassion, sleeping 4 hours nightly, perpetually at sea, chain smoking, existing on tea and nervous intensity. He died that evening of a cerebral thrombosis, essentially a stroke induced by chronic stress and exhaustion. The Royal Navy interred him with full honours at Liverpool's Rake Lane Cemetery. His final count: 25 U-boats destroyed or shared, more than any other Allied commander. Buttercup survived its architect. By mid-1944, virtually every Atlantic convoy deployed systematic zigzag patterns, many derived directly from Walker's computations. The Admiralty's tactical branch extended the concept, creating patterns, Buttercup, Daisy, and Primrose, for various threat conditions and convoy velocities. The patterns became standardized tradition taught at HMS, excellent and integrated into convoy commodore instruction. What Walker had developed as an experimental resolution became fundamental naval operations. The pattern's impact reached beyond immediate wartime use. Post-war examination by the Admiralty's historical branch determined that systematic zigzagging, combined with increased escort quantities and air coverage, diminished U-boat effectiveness by approximately 70% between May 1943 and war's conclusion. Walker's geometric methodology to the challenge had demonstrated that anti-submarine combat could be scientifically optimized rather than abandoned to intuition and bravery alone. During the Cold War, Walker's concepts influenced both NATO and Soviet naval strategy, though in reversed form. Nuclear submarines, far swifter and more advanced than Type 7YI U-boats, became the predators. Surface vessels became potential targets. But the mathematics Walker had investigated, the geometry of pursuit, the probability computations of weapon deployment, the benefits of unpredictable movement, remained applicable. Soviet submarine commanders examined Walker's operations to comprehend how Western surface formations might evade torpedo strikes. NATO anti-submarine units examined them to determine optimal evasive patterns for carrier battle formations facing submarine dangers. The Royal Navy's Submarine Command Course, established in 1917 but comprehensively reorganized post-war, incorporated Walker's engagement evaluations into its program. Submarine commanders learned to identify systematic evasive patterns and modify their tactics accordingly. Surface warfare officers learned Walker's geometric fundamentals for escort arrangement and evasive movement. The curriculum recognized that Walker had fundamentally transformed the tactical balance between submarine and surface ship. Today, Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth incorporates Walker's case examples in its tactical instruction curriculum. Officer candidates examine the mathematics of Buttercup, not as historical artifact, but as foundational comprehension of how systematic examination can resolve apparently unsolvable tactical challenges. The concept that rigorous mathematical reasoning can triumph over material disadvantage remains central to Royal Navy tactical philosophy. Contemporary naval armaments have progressed beyond recognition, but the geometric relationships between attacker, target, and weapon remain governed by the identical physics Walker manipulated. Walker's personal documents, preserved at the National Museum of the Royal Navy in Portsmouth, disclose a mind that perceived warfare as applied mathematics. His notebooks contain computations for challenges far beyond convoy protection, optimal search configurations for hunting submarines, probability distributions for depth charge performance, geometric resolutions for escort positioning. Had he survived the conflict, one contemplates what other ingenious solutions he might have calculated. The Atlantic remembers him differently than official histories indicate. His grave in Liverpool receives occasional visitors, elderly merchant seamen who crossed on his convoys, their descendants, naval officers paying tribute. They come because Walker's obsessive computations translated directly into survival. Every ship that reached harbor because torpedoes missed by 800 yards represented lives preserved by geometry. In the merciless mathematics of the Atlantic, where Britain's existence hung by a thread measured in tons of shipping, one commander's systematic zigzag pattern reduced losses by 3/5. Sometimes the ingenious solution proves to be the only rational response.